Good morning. So I have the pleasure of introducing our keynote speaker for today. Here's a microphone. I don't know what to tell you. Let me see. Yeah. All right. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
All right. No. Well, whoever said no, there's a seat up here, okay? So I have the pleasure of introducing my colleague Dave Lambert. We as a regional network, CENIC, we sort of exist in an ecosystem of networks. Other regional networks, national networks like Internet2, like the DRAN, like the Energy Sciences Network, and so on. Like now it's really loud. I have no control over this. It's like it's like I felt with my kids when they were teenagers. I had about as much control over them as I did the weather. And so we work on a number of projects, common projects with Internet2. And we're involved at any given time on 2 or 3 different projects. A little bit about Dave. He was named President and CEO of Internet2 in July of 2010. Prior to becoming the Internet2 CEO, he was a Vice President for Information Services and Chief Information Officer at Georgetown University. His leadership efforts there focused on the deployment of advanced technology infrastructure, modern information systems, and a responsive technology support services. I know from being on the Georgetown campus when Dave was at Georgetown, and in fact I was at Duke in those years, that he had not only done a great job of deploying this technology, but he had a fantastic relationship with the university president and all of the academic leadership of the institution. Prior to coming to Georgetown, he served as Vice President for Information Technology at Cornell University, and he's held several technical and leadership positions at Indiana University, Bloomington. He's done quite a bit of service nationally. He was the board chair of the New York State Research and Education Network, NYSERNet. He was a trustee representing Georgetown University on the Southeastern Universities Research Association, SURA, and he currently serves on the board of the National Association of College and University Business Officers, NACUBO. Please join me in welcoming Dave Lambert.
Well, yeah, I was warned that this was a relatively touchy microphone setup, so I will do my best to not touch it and to see if we can sort of persist here. First of all, thank you very much for the invitation to have an opportunity to come talk to the folks who are the lifeblood of one of our extraordinary state network operations. Internet2 and CENIC, have a lot of things that we work on together. We have a lot of things in common, but many of you may not realize, although I see some people with gray hair and long tales of history in the room, that Internet2 and CENIC were born about the same time, and were born out of one of those eras in the history of research and education networking in the United States, where we were going very much through a transition when the sort of National Science Foundation, what's called NSFNet, had sort of run its course, and it became obvious to many of us in the higher education community that we couldn't depend on the federal government to make sure that we had advanced capabilities. And it was also a time when many of the first generation state and regional networks, which had been birthed primarily as sort of feeder infrastructures for the old NSFnet and the supercomputer centers had kind of run up against some walls. Many of them had actually been sold off to the commercial industry, and there were many of us at that point who felt that it was time for a rebirth, and so there was a period of time there when a number of not only was Internet2 born, but a number of sort of new state network efforts were created, and CENIC was one of those. And they were sort of birthed in a period of an enormous amount of energy, around advanced research applications, the ability to sustain our unique advantage in higher education in terms of our ability to get access to the very best and the very fastest network, to sort of capitalize and continue to support this history of innovation that we had. And so when you look at the projects that came out of that time period, they have made remarkable contributions to this research and education networking ecosystem. Fast forward a little bit to the last sort of era here, which for me is kind of defined by the time I've been in this role at Internet2, has also been characterized, virtually throughout our ecosystem as a kind of an inflection point in a history that, goes back decades now, and looking at the things that have been the focal point of the research and education networks in these last 3 to 4 years. We have virtually all been able to replace our network infrastructures. We've made the transition from up the pipeline from 10 gigabit to 100 gigabit services. We've introduced new concepts of virtualized networking in stage ones into our network. We have broadened the base of significantly broadened the base of non-large university actors who are able to participate in our network. We have scrambled to respond to the needs of our campus chief information officers by beginning to do that inevitable march up the stack that has been important. And so these last 2 or 3 years has seen a kind of a complete sort of step back assessment of how, as that ecosystem Lewis talks about, we sort of work together. And I think we made some great strides forward in that space. I think it bodes very well for the future. And so what I'd like to do with the time that you all are willing to sort of give to me this morning, though, is to sort of say, okay, all that's great. Our history, is impressive. We've done good work, but as we look out, 2, 3, 5, 10 years ahead of us, what is it that is unfolding in the research and education communities that are so tightly woven into the fabric that both birthed and continues to support, and continues to provide the resource base for this, for these extraordinary things we do, and what's going on there in the world that's going to shape that? Well, sort of coming out of what I call our sort of first cycle strategic plan in Internet2, we've now turned our attention, with the Internet2 executive team, with our program advisory groups, with focus groups of chief information officers, leaders of state and regional networks, researchers around the country, beginning now to sort of sort through what lies ahead. And we have sort of bubbled up a process of some things that I think are going to, as I talk about some of these things, I have to tell you the truth. I'm not sure what the impact is going to be on research and education networks, either Internet2 or CENIC or anyone else. But what I think we understand at this point in time is that the future is going to be radically different than the past, and radically different from what I call sort of our near present. That the maturation and the extension of very high-speed digital networks, digitization of information is fundamentally now, and I mean fundamentally changing the nature and fabric of the businesses that our institutional members are involved in. And I think one could say that up until this point, technology has been a sort of a stepping stone, a foundation, an enabler, but I think it has also created a set of activities and processes that are taking this whole thing to a new level, that for the research and education community, for community anchors, for all of us who are in the enlightenment business, which is really the thing we have in common, that we are approaching another inflection that's going to be of the magnitude of the Industrial Revolution. And how we chart our way through those rough waters, I would argue, is going to be very dependent on how the community of leaders who have created and who drive these research and education networks engage in this process. I was at one of the great benefits of this job is you really get to meet some neat people, right? That you wouldn't otherwise. There's a gentleman that you may have seen. He keynoted one of our meetings. His name is Sam Petroda. Sam is an Indian American business leader who, at the same time, he's a successful U.S.-based global businessman. Is also the science and technology advisor to the Prime Minister of India. And I've gotten the opportunity to spend some time with Sam in his office in Chicago, and Sam has always taken a strong interest in research and education networks. In fact, he has been almost single-handedly the leader in India that has created a new enterprise called the National Knowledge Network, whose goal in a country of 1.3 billion people is to create the next generation information society. That is capable not just of delivering economic development, but of supporting this radical new element of their national constitution, which guarantees a college education to everybody in the country. And I asked Sam at one point, well, why are you paying attention to research and education networks? Why from where you sit are these things important? Why are you investing as much energy as you are in creating this infrastructure in India? And his answer surprised me, and because I consider myself to sort of be one of those out front thinkers, and Sam was 3 hills ahead of me, because what he said, and I think this is something that we really need to be proud of, but also be humble about, is that the combination of digitization, the information age, advanced networking, and all these technologies that we're at the confluence of, is creating a dynamic and an infrastructure that is going to have, in history, is going to be looked at as every bit as important as the massive transitions in human history. As the migration from Ethiopia. As the rise of the Catholic Church and the history that unfolded around that, as the Industrial Revolution. And if you look at how that's going to happen, you look at the institutions that exist. Governments are going to play an important role here because they can mobilize money and they can build infrastructure. And they're going to be the individual leader that's going to be very important in this, who's going to be able to rise above and articulate visions. But he said, as I think about this, there's only one institution that exists that I think understands all of this and is positioned to drive this. And these are the National Research and Education Networks and the Research and Education Network communities that exist around that. It is unique this ecology that Lewis talked about. It is powerful, and we're the stewards of it. And at the same time that we pat ourselves on the back for some of the extraordinary things we've done here in California, around the nation, in the U.S. and around the world, it also has you thinking about a little bit more about the kind of obligation you have. So what I want to do is talk a little bit this morning about kind of, okay, what are those things that are happening that we're going to have to pay attention to? And I'm going to sort of rattle through these and make some points, and I hope get through this, and then I'd like to then sort of bring it around full circle and say, okay, what does that mean for research and education networks and the communities and the organizations that are part of them? The one that has to be front and center on everybody's mind is what I would broadly call educational and institutional transformation. We're being hit with it everywhere. It's no longer solely driven by economics, but a confluence of factors, unsustainable financial models, where we're already seeing students driven to alternatives to residential education, explosions in pathways to learning opportunities, deconstruction and aggregation of learning objects from institutional control to individual choice. This has been referred to recently by David Ward, who is the ex-president of ACE, ex-chancellor of the University of Wisconsin, who is quite a traditionalist, frankly, as an irreversible change in higher education, exhibited in the rise of open content, MOOCs, the flipped classrooms. The interesting thing, though, is that it's operating not in a local context, but in a global context. And when you talk to the people who are in the institutions who are getting out in front here, 75, 80, 85, 90% of the people participating in this are not in the U.S. And so we're seeing this new kind of global, all these new concepts developing here. And I'm not arrogant enough or smart enough to suggest to you that I have any sense where this is going to end up. Okay, we have theories from it's going to transform education to, coupled with residential education, this is going to be a powerful learning opportunity. The only thing I can sort of say based on my tenure here in the academy, and having both watched it for 30 years and studied a bit the history of the last 500 years from the University of Paris and Bologna on, that what is happening now is different than any challenge that we've addressed in the past. That the most kind of parallel impact that I can isolate out in the U.S. history is sort of the post-Civil War Moral Land Grant Act, the Moral Land Grant Act, the creation of the state universities, and the almost simultaneous movement of the private institutions in the U.S. to disaffiliate with their religious background, not disaffiliate, but begin to build different kinds of institutions. And this was an extraordinary inflection point in not just higher education in the U.S., but in terms of the locus of where research gets done, the models for education. And again, I think that history will show that the inflection point we're at now, while I'm not prepared to predict what the outcome is, I think it's going to be extraordinary. And all this I just pointed out is happening in the context of the globalization of research and education, right? National is the new local, and global is the new national. Many of CENIC's current members and Internet2's members are investing heavily in building global programs through campuses and partnerships. We've got U.S. institutions building new campuses in China, in the Middle East, in Latin America. This is actually part strategic because we're seeing the globalization of everything. And also a part just simply following the wisdom attributed to the famous bank robber Willie Sutton, who many of you will recall that when he was asked after he was arrested, supposedly, why do you rob banks? What was his answer?
That's where the money is.
Yeah. And the business of research and education has become global. The portion of research funding across all of the major research funders that goes to projects that are organized at the global level is slipping above the 50% point when you try to balance those, and increasing at a very rapid pace. Simply put, I think the level of challenge that exists in solving these large-scale science issues, all the way from the galaxies that are around us to the genomes that are inside us, requires such extraordinary investment, such complicated instrumentation, such extraordinary infrastructure, and such a high level of engagement from the domain science communities that there is no choice but to do this from a global perspective. And just as sort of individual investigator research funding was supplanted by national scale research projects on your campus, and I know how hard many of you have worked at the universities to help them understand that and not be victims of it. The scale of the remaining big challenges requires a global level of organization. And so at Internet2 right now, we often kind of find ourselves in these situations where, we're as a leadership team, as a staff, in engagement with the community, are working and thinking about challenges and projects that we have to do. And not a single one of them presents themselves as a national only problem. When we were giving birth to Net Plus, Shell and I had this notion that sometime 2 or 3 years down the road, if we did this right, what we were doing, would begin to play out on a global scale. What we discovered relatively quickly was that the level of that every research and education network around the globe was being driven by the same factors, the need to sort of go up that scale. And so the combination of these two things, transformation and globalization, is powerful. But it's accompanied, I think, by another phenomenon that is extremely important, and that is that we have crossed over into the age of content. That what people are really focused on right now is not the technology, and that's a frustration often for people in our positions, because you're trying to sell people on the need to invest in infrastructure. They don't care about it. They don't care about it. Their minds are focused on what I can do with this and what content I can get to, and how is that content going to impact sort of what I have to do. And so that dual emergence of the internet and digitization is quickly making this, I think, the age of content. Your visionaries like Chuck Vest at MIT, who we unfortunately just recently lost to our community, realized a decade ago with the OpenCourseWare project that the most valuable institutional asset was course content. Not our campuses, not our brands, not our histories, but content. And took this audacious step at one of the best universities in the world of saying, I'm willing to put that content out there, not knowing, to affect society in a great way. Well, I know Chuck well enough to know that that was one of the reasons he did it. But the other reason he did it was because he knew the future of the value calculation in education was going to lie with content. And he wanted MIT to be ahead of the curve and have MIT content positioned in places where they could continue as an institution to have the same kind of impact that they had had for decades. Scores of studies report university students access content more from the internet than from textbooks, and it increases every day. Authoritative content is now created and distributed in radically different ways. Remember how much fun they made of Wikipedia? when they started? You know, in a crowdsourced context, utilizing the power of this community. They have managed to create the most authoritative reference database across the broadest array of content ever built, dwarfing what happened in prior cycles. Here's the interesting thing, though, that I think, you know, has real implications for thinking about as kind of technologists and infrastructure builders what we do. Higher education is the source of the majority of academically relevant content. But as we think about the future of our institutions, we've failed to monetize it completely. You know, we've essentially turned it over to the private publishing industries and then put ourselves bankrupt buying it back for our students and our libraries, and worse yet, building buildings to house it in. And so somehow, some way in this age of content, we have to find a different way of thinking about how we position the things that we do. Enough of you were around, I think, a few years ago, a couple of decades ago, when you know, we were seeing the integration of data technologies and voice technologies, right? And we had this mantra that said, hey, and we've done this, voice yearns to be free. You know, it's just another very low bandwidth application on a digital packet network. And so, you know, as CIOs, and I know there are several in the room, we got our hands on the telecom enterprise. And, you know, we milked it for everything we could. In fact, in many cases, that's where the money came from to invest in CENIC and in Internet2 and these other institutions. But I hate to tell those people who are running data networks now that have business models that are built around bits, that we're probably now well into a process that says data yearns to be free. That the value proposition, the things that people are willing to write the checks for now are content. And so the questions confronting us as we try to figure out how to make these research and education networks financially viable, at the same time that the financial attracted is content. I mean, when you write that check to Comcast every month, and it's going to be a big check, right? Or to Verizon, okay? You're not writing it for bits, right? You're writing it for content. And so we have to factor this into that. And while what we started out here as is, you know, are sort of research networks, and we'll talk a little bit more about how that has morphed in time. Research is sort of sitting on the edge of going through one of the biggest paradigm shifts that it has experienced as we move into what various people have characterized as big data era, the era of the fourth paradigm of science. And in fact, in recent years, the ability to generate, store, and analyze large quantities of data has ushered in a completely new age of science. Again, often labeled big data science, fourth paradigm of science, where the old sort of scientific model has given way to one which places more emphasis on mining data, massive amounts of data, early on in the discovery process. You see this happening across the domain sciences in astronomy, physics, medicine, business, social sciences, etc. At the core of this whole thing, though, is the role of analytics. And this shift has, and I think, you know, already, but has even more potential to significantly change the skills and resources necessary to be among research leaders. And as purveyors and providers of the most significant science infrastructure, bear in mind that across the Internet2 member base, they're responsible for $54 billion of research a year. And I'm suspecting a good portion of that is California. I would say probably probably in excess of, probably pushing up toward 20 billion. I haven't been able to isolate out those numbers yet, but we're working on that. And these infrastructures that we're building, you know, in CENIC, you know, in MCNC, in MER, in Internet2, is the infrastructure that supports this extraordinary financial engine. But that's about to change. I mean, the basis of the way people work with science, the tools they have to have, where they need to be positioned in the ecosystem is changing radically. And it's moving in the direction that while historically we were comfortable with moving large chunks of data from one place to another, the amount of data that we have to move in the future is orders of magnitude more. Probably, in fact, so much that we can't move it. Probably so much that we have to redesign our networks so that we can take the users there to the data. And that's a big challenge that's sitting out in front of us. But the technology is changing too. And, you know, there's another sort of migration or change transition that's happening in IT infrastructure that is very important to this whole thing. And that is we have seen over the last decade through the core sort of computer science concepts of virtualization, a whole-scale change in what IT infrastructure is capable of doing. I mean, think back to how you build infrastructure to solve application problems before virtualization of computation and virtualization of storage. Think about the number of businesses that have come into place, okay, built on the foundation, the technical foundation of virtualization of storage and computation. Google, Amazon, Facebook. None of these large-scale global application spaces could exist without the flexible scale that is created by virtualization. And so now, move over here to take a look at the network, okay? The network technology that is the dominant network technology that's used in the current internet primarily is only 40 years old. 45, in fact. So what could be wrong with that? Well, I think the answer to that is that it doesn't provide the kind of flexibility that we need to have. And we constantly find ourselves in a situation where we're trying to retrofit our application problems to the character and nature of the existing internet. What's happened that changed that is that the computer science community and the corporate community in the United States, heavily in California, one more tip of the hat to our colleagues in California, is the creation of is crossing the line to virtualization of the network layer. And we have been, as research and education networks, initially a bit behind the curve in the adoption of virtualization of infrastructure, seeing companies like Amazon and Google begin to use these technologies that we're creating in our universities and moving out ahead of us. I hope in the last 2 years, we've caught up. The Internet2 network, layer 2, layer 3 services, now runs on a virtualized network technology. And we did that in about 18 months. But think now, as the virtualization of networking begins to push itself out into the application space, the enormous potential to treat the network the same way that we've been able to create storage and computation. To be able to cut a slice through the network that has one set of characteristics and another slice through the network with yet another set of performance characteristics. But more importantly, I think about the interaction effect that exists now of having virtualized storage, virtualized computation, and now virtualized networking. And if one can assume that the introduction of virtualized networking could have as much impact on IT infrastructure and services and applications as the introduction of virtualized storage and computation, that's a massive change that we're going to have to deal with. It's going to be a challenge, and it's also going to create opportunity. But now, think about the vaunted interaction effect now, of having all three legs of that technical stool virtualizable. As we engage the very best and the brightest in our academic communities and in our mutual corporate members' research offices, the ability to think radically differently about how you construct an application in this virtualized space is going to create as much transition in the networking space as it did. You know, anybody who thinks they have an incumbent position in networking, anybody that thinks they have a business model that's sustainable, you know, anybody that thinks they have a technical infrastructure or architecture, you know, that is going to put them at competitive advantage, you had better think again, because the good probability is you do not. Now, along with that, you know, now comes a completely different mindset, heavily actually introduced by what the commercial companies like Google and Amazon and Facebook and the mobile companies were able to do as a result of being able to build these large-scale national infrastructures so that they could deliver unique technologies directly to individual consumers. What we've now seen is that this success of these new consumer technologies that are so easily customizable has created a completely different expectation from our students, our faculty, our staff, that they can have their technology just exactly like they want it. They can have technology a la carte experiences. You know, they can look at a big menu of things that are doable, institutional standards be damned, and they will do exactly what they want to do. That battle's being fought by CIOs and IT directors all over the country as your users bleed off into commercial spaces and commercial applications that are creating enormous challenges for those of you who operate institutional service bases to blend your campus-based services with these commercial offerings. These experiences are fundamentally changing the expectations of consumers. And here's a very interesting thought. Historically, our business has been a bundling business, right? Okay, you know, we sit here, somebody on our board pointed this out to the presidents on our board with, you know, some creating a little bit of, you didn't really say that, did you? In a deep discussion about the inadequacies of the cable industry. We have a gentleman on our board, John Evans, who's a cable pioneer and been involved in the cable industry for a long time. And a conversation about technology broke out. Somebody went into the typical rant about their disgust with having to buy the cable companies all their basic channels, and then they could get the movie package and then get the other packages, and what was happening on our campus. And we know this is true. Is that the network now is breaking all that up, right? You know, we've heard stories, for instance, that campus cable TV systems, many of them are down in the single digits in terms of subscription right now. Because basically students are able to get their content wherever they want it and however they want it. John was so rude then in that conversation to break it up and remind the presidents that we were also a bundling industry. And as much risk lay ahead for us in this notion that, you know, you can have what you want, and you can have it when you want it. You can have it the way you want it, and you can combine it with other things that are important to you. And so how do we make our services relevant in this age of individual empowerment, which is, of course, fueled by the age of mobility? The introduction of wireless networks and the connection of those wireless networks to the internet of content, smartphones, tablets, have now created this expectation that any service can be accessed at the time and place of the individual's choosing. It has become a major challenge for IT leaders in higher education and other industries, the proliferation of devices, the need to expand wireless access points on campus, the need to redesign applications, the ability to deliver services transparently off the campus, including to their students who are traveling globally and their faculty members who are assigned to that new campus program in Qatar, in a province in China, in South America. But we've talked about this for a long time as technologists. We want anything, anytime, any place. It's real now. It's real now. And not only is there an expectation of individual empowerment, but that empowerment needs to be delivered right to my device, right? That I can get at any time, anywhere, any size, whenever I want to. And the interesting question becomes, how will this shift impact the structure of not just networking, but research and education? How do we deliver it at the right time, where the learner is, where the researcher is, through the technology they have available to them, becomes a big, big challenge for us. But now all of this transpires in another very, very interesting context. And that is that at the same time that, we see these folks, there is an increasing demand for the things we do to reach other communities. And CENIC is the best evidence in the world of that. What I call the translational relevance of what we were doing. More than half of Internet2's members are public institutions with defined outreach missions. Our private universities have significant service missions. Just as we have watched, when we started out this R&E networking thing, we called them R&E networks, but the R was about this big, right? The R was about this big, and the E was down here, okay? How true is that for CENIC right now? That E, the R's getting bigger, right? Big data, analytics, but the E is getting bigger too. And now what's happening is that there's another piece of this that gets even bigger, and that is what I call the S, the service mission. The fact that our institutions all have extensive service missions, whether they're public or private institutions, in economic development, community anchor advancement, healthcare, across the spectrum of community impact. And so we have these extraordinary opportunities to look at the technology and service we depend on to address the core issues of transforming our institution, but they also have the power to change other institutions as well. And in fact, we just completed, I believe it's the third survey across all of the state and regional networks of how many institutions actually are capable of passing traffic over our network. This project was created by Lewis when he was responsible for the Internet K-12. When we submitted the proposal for our BTOP award in 2009, we had roughly there are roughly, just to set the frame, there are roughly right around 200,000 what the National Broadband calls anchor institutions: libraries, K-12 schools, health institutions, museums, science centers, zoos, aquariums, community and vocational colleges, public radio, TV, colleges and universities, all of these entities that serve this enlightenment function within our society. Around 200,000 of those. When we last did this survey and I believe the survey dated back to 2009, I believe the last one was. Although we used the numbers in 2009. James is in the room. When was the last survey?
That's 2009.
2009. The repeat survey in 2013 shows an increment of about 25-30% in just that 3-year period. We now, the state and regional networks connect 85,000 K-12 schools. That's up in the vicinity, I think, James, about 60% of the K-12 schools in the country. In California, I think that number is well in excess of 90%. And there's some states that haven't done this well. In Michigan, I think that number is approaching 100%, North Carolina. But over 2,000 health institutions, over 200 museums, science centers, 800 community and vocational colleges, 31 public radio, TV organizations, and 1,500 colleges and universities. This is an extraordinary community of impact that we live in. And that brings with it an enormous set of opportunities and an enormous set of challenges to meet. This is all happening, of course, concurrently with the increasing, as these things become more, we become more institutionally dependent on these things, with increasing focus on identity, privacy, and security. The old New Yorker cartoon that many of you may have seen in your life, that has the dog sitting at the computer terminal, turning around, looking at the other dog, and basically says, "Nobody knows you're a dog on the internet." Well, that was a great world to live in for a while, right? But we've learned we don't live in that world now. And so the challenges of figuring out how we're going to, particularly with the development of these MOOCs, how do we know who's taking the course? If content becomes the new currency, the realm for higher education, how do we protect our property and have control over how it gets out? If our medical schools are going to lead the genomics revolution, how do we assure individual privacy is protected? All of our current approaches to assuring identity, protecting privacy, securing information are structured very much around residential identity and are not suitable to this new world. And this the R&E infrastructure is no longer useful without a sharp focus on identity, privacy, and security. And Internet2 and the state and regional networks have been pioneers in this area, but we're going to have to up our game. Else we're going to have an order imposed on us that will be a challenge to address in the future. But then all of these things are happening, and here's the one that just really perplexes me. In this environment of acceleration, things are moving so fast. Technology hardware has continued to grow exponentially as predicted by Moore's Law. Applications have historically advanced much more slowly, but with the introduction of cloud services, application stores, healthy market, something as supposedly simple as the iTunes, as the App Store, and Apple, which now has hundreds of millions of applications out there, has fundamentally changed this. And the change in the application space, the change in the content space is moving even faster than the speed of hardware changes. So I don't know who wants to name the law, but Moore's Law is kind of a slow pace relative to what we see happening. And we find ourselves in this environment often where by the time we figure out how we're going to put together a plan to address a particular challenge, it's irrelevant. Somebody else already solved the problem. It's moved on. So we're trying to address all of these challenges in this context where it is moving so fast. And so as you look through this panoply of kind of environmental factors that are shaping us, I think, and we begin to think about our research and education networks, we have to think about them differently, and you see that process beginning. You certainly see CENIC out in front of this effort that these entities, aren't really spatialized network providers. They're not regional spatialized ISPs. They're becoming essential enabling platforms that are connected to the whole fabric of society. You know, we can't be afraid to take risks and experiment. You know, we become and need to become innovation incubators. You know, we're not we stopped being supply-side market players, and we're now demand-side aggregators, right? With our Net Plus programs and the pressures we're putting on our providers. We're not contract brokers anymore. We're market aggregators. You know, we're not just carriers of knowledge. We're actually knowledge multipliers. You know, we're not just a vehicle for research. You know, these things we do are instruments themselves. We're no longer sinks of public and institutional investment. We're economic development engines for the entities that we're part of. We have to operate these things, but we're not really operating companies anymore. We're transformational vehicles. We're not neutral connection services. We're really collaboration enablers. And we're really not anymore just an aggregator of community efforts, but we're a community developer. And that's where the real power comes from. And just in terms of some final thoughts, it's fascinating to me as an IT leader how many of these changes we're facing have been brought about by changes in technology, right? It's very hard for us as technologists to step up and say, society's changing because of technology. What we always have to say is, technology just, you know, there to support what you want to do. Well, folks, we all know better. You know, we all know that all of those things I just talked about, which are impacting the research and education and service environments, are there because of what's happened with technology. This certainly tells me that IT has now become extremely strategic in higher education and advanced research, and needs both attention of its higher education, and the highest level of resources. The development of research and education networks, the communities that gave birth to them, and the leaders who built them and run them still have been key catalysts in enabling these changes, I think. The next chapter for Internet2, for CENIC, our next generation of challenges and opportunities will be shaped by the forces I've talked about this morning. That next chapter will be shaped by the people in this room and the people in other rooms just like this all over the country, you know, at the Internet2 Global Summit, at Terrena, at APAN, at meetings that are at TCAL, at meetings that are occurring all over the world. What's happening here is nothing short of revolutionary. It will be shaped by the commitment we make and the support we provide to assuring our research and education and, yes, service network organizations remain innovative, remain deeply committed to serving the needs of our communities, and relevant to the challenges and opportunities our members face. So thank you for giving me an opportunity to share what's kind of in our minds right now with you this morning. I hope I've said some things that you can kind of take out and maybe challenge yourself to jump into the fray here. Thank you, Bill, for the invitation. Lewis, Sherilyn, thank you so much for inviting me, and thank you all for listening this morning.